We're keeping track. We're investigating, Bruno. Okay. So in that case, let's begin. Welcome everyone to the concurrent session, Politics of Basic Income 1. We'll have some great discussion today. The timing will be about 15 minutes per presentation. We will have a little extra flexibility if Bruno never shows, but I'll try to keep it about that time. In case he does show up, then we'll have time for Bruno to hop in later. And then at the end, we'll have some question and answer sessions. You can ask directly because the microphones are in the heavens above us, so you don't need a microphone. All right, let's begin. So if Peter Brake, we can have his presentation prepared since we will skip Bruno. Peter from the Universal Entitlement Organization will present on taxing the rich to afford a UBI. I love this photo, by the way. I need this. I need this for my poster. That's so cool. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. While traveling in Greece in '91, I met Jim and Ann Wishart. Jim, a retired engineer, told me that in the 1970s, the British Labour Party calculated the VAT rate required to fund a UBI and the removal of all income taxes there. And looking at this, I took the situation of our poorest, living in their cars in Auckland City, or 25-year-olds living rent-free in their parents' homes. They spend all of their money on VAT goods. The egalitarian principles of the left would have the New Zealand Green Party's new guaranteed minimum income policy of $385 per week would need to be $500 to buy the same amount of goods when financed from a VAT rise or GST. People paying rent or mortgages which are VAT exempt would be substantially better off. That happened twice. A few years after this, curiosity had me projecting forward the decline in continental population growth rates. I watched as Africa again had the highest population in the world. I saw the decimation of the populations of Europe, Asia, and the Americas, with Africa the last to decline. There's a UBI in answer to this. In South Korea, with a birth rate of just over 1, your heroes are the parents of 3 or more children. After presenting a EU UBI paper in South Korea in 2016, Sarah over a beer asked me how India could fund a UBI. With 6% of people in formal employment, their income tax was not going to be sufficient. I told him it had to be a federal VAT tax. We were texting a year or two later as the Indian states were ratifying the new federal VAT tax. I suggested that they demanded a UBI for their people before they signed. A couple of years after that, I presented a paper in Hyderabad showing that an income tax rate of 90% was needed to fund a 30,000 rupee subsistence UBI there. It was the recently released VAT results that allowed me and both parties to advertise a better VAT-funded basic income scheme in the election run-up. Any country with a GDP per capita less than India, which is 1/3 of the world's population, cannot fund a UBI from any other tax. An income tax anywhere near this, and the country's wheels would fall off. Highly taxing workers while being concerned that they might quit on receipt of a UBI is not a good idea. Sarah asked if I would join a starting up Be an Outreach group, and I eventually focalized assisting groups in finding their nation's funding alternatives. We looked at a number of countries and eventually had a request from the UNDP to look at China's funding. Currently, China has a 17% efficiency of getting existing funding to the poor. The universality of a UBI fixes this. They are currently running pilots with an expiring digital UBI funded from sovereign free money there. VAT is already a big part of the Chinese government's earnings, and they could easily fund a UBI from a VAT rise. I quoted Scott Sanson's USA work in a presentation in Portugal in 2017 and got to have dinner and several drinks with him after a conference there. We talked about the math behind VAT funding. You're earning direct funding from the spending of the UBI, and the velocity of money assists this higher-based UBI funding more than any other. Scott became one of Andrew Yang's principal advisors in the Democratic presidential candidacy in the USA. They too have done the math and included a VAT-funded UBI policy. Scott's now in Washington doing great work, and I wish Andrew well in the newly formed Ford Party that season policy. The complication in Europe is the common market. Bulgaria requires a 30% VAT rise to fund a UBI and a small income tax exemption there. Germany needs just over half of that. These divergent rates would have people from Poland doing the shopping in Germany, right when Poland's governments need those sales to fund their own UBI. In support of the European Union, Germany too raised its VAT rate 30%. The higher UBI gives a better result to the poorest, and the surplus is more than the entire income tax take. If you made the first 100,000 euros income tax exempt, you could cherry pick whatever taxes to remove or offer other services. I find this preferable to not taxing the highest earners, trying to get closer to the rich, not further away. Carbon tax and dividend can turn the harm from increased consumption to a benefit, rightfully directing spending and development to sustainable alternatives. With a smaller footprint, the vast majority of the poor and middle earners are better off. The rich will buy electric cars. The environment is best off, and because of this, so are we all. We extrapolated our UBI results from the EU, New Zealand, and India worldwide based on GDP per capita. The VAT earnings were in accordance plus or minus 10% of this. 30 countries couldn't fund from VAT or any other tax. Their economies weren't big enough. These are suggestions of how that shortfall could be met, thanks to Paul Harnett, World Basic Income, and Sam McKinnon's illustrations are on our Universal Entitlement Facebook page. And we wanted to get this post sponsored to get the word out. This required us to be a charitable trust. The Charities Commission told us that we'd helped too many people to be considered a charity. We went next level to the Charities Board and showed that VAT funding offered the best result to the poor, improving the lives of every person earning under 17,000 in the myubi.co.nz micro-simulation. And this was eventually overturned. We are the world's first UBI charitable trust. We refused to be an educational trust as we wanted our charitable cause acknowledged. Now, UBI is for us all, but it has a real chance of ending poverty and world hunger. It took us a year to get this approved. 3 days after our acceptance, Facebook specifically took away our right to advertise. Interestingly, they closed us down last night. We've duplicated the videos on the Universal Entitlement Charitable Trust page. The videos explain it all. There are links to this showing results for every country and letters for their ministers. Taxing the rich. With little direct capital gains being realised in their personal ownership and comparatively little direct tax earnings, we need to properly tax the corporates that they own as well as the gain on those shares. This wealth chart shows that what assets are owned at different levels of net worth. And I like it that the billionaires have most of their wealth shown here in the deep blue, and corporate business interests doing and making stuff. These and corporate holding companies in the light blue are among the shares that they don't much trade. Capital gains from realised profit has been taxed to some extent in 25% of countries. Taxes have been received from shares, foreign exchanges, investments and property, amongst others. Our simulations show that the savings rate is retained on receipt of a UBI. This will be the largest increase in investments ever seen in most countries. With no need to entice investment, not having a CGT is in danger of being a state-sponsored class system. People's homes in orange is the prime asset of the low and middle earners, exempting primary residence as multiple property owners, mostly millionaires and richer, being taxed. Only a small proportion of the wealth of the very rich is in property, which is that bottom orange one. The newly agreed global corporate minimum tax, we call it the Amazon tax here in New Zealand, charges a multinational operating in New Zealand 15% tax on profits. And this is less than someone on minimum wage pays in New Zealand. 170 countries that have signed this will receive tax from a multinational for the first time. And I consider this establishes that the world agrees that corporates should pay tax in the country in which they trade, as was the case long before these legal entities were created. A trading platform or money transfer system could deduct from the buyer the correct VAT amount, as well as the local corporate tax rate from the multinational, bringing fair taxation and fair competition everywhere. The removal of tax avoidance from the decisions in a market economy brings the untainted efficiencies derived from focusing on costs, supply and demand. Fair competition is the cornerstone of economic liberalism. This change is needed to fully realise this ideal. Our Bill of Rights in New Zealand rules out a wealth tax, as Germany's Constitutional Court ruled it out in '96. The court cases arguing values and rich people moving over the border wasn't good for the country. With recent events, we need our schools to teach constitutional rights to our children and to write it in bold on the Parliament wall. A world wealth tax will be outside of our constitution, though. 1% of the collective 12.7 trillion wealth of the world's 2,600 odd billionaires is sufficient to cover the shortfall in every nation affording a UBI funded by VAT. Directing this money via a UN Global Wealth Fund to the people in the 30 poorest nations ends world hunger. A world wealth tax could right some wrongs. Make it a law, but to stop the court cases, I suggest that the ultra-rich do their own wealth calculations, and any discrepancies can be settled with their inheritance tax. Sorry, Elon, not even Mars citizenship exempts you. Earth holdings accrue Earth taxes. Inheritance tax collected from cash-up estates on transfer to beneficiaries is straightforward. South Korea has the second highest rate of 50%. Just remember that the rich are spending money researching how to live forever, and moving makes it avoidable. With sovereign free money, everyone is better off. With a lot of endless money creation, our billionaires will quickly become trillionaires. They will be able to do more with their charity work and be able to purchase small countries and possibly be benevolent rulers. It seems likely they will own a larger percentage of global assets, though. The UBI base received for sovereign free money will be at most the same as an income tax funded UBI. The higher UBI financed from VAT would remain the best result for the poor, middle earners, and the high saving rich. If Africa and the world embarked on a sovereign free money funded UBI, collectively managing stimulus and exchange rates, the low production capacity in Africa would still cause inflation. VAT being deflationary is an answer to that. And with people spending their UBI, more UBI funding is afforded each year in a growing economy. If I was Elon of Mars, I would offer a 10% tax for businesses based on Mars and the moons. The move to space with this tax incentive will redirect the industrial complex to keep people productive, making rockets, innovating, and building new infrastructure, rather than building bombs and weapons. $2.24 trillion, the new record last year. It is an alternate finished product, and this policy will move its development to where it's needed, into space. With the phasing out of oil, government finances will take a hit. The war has led to much higher food prices, which I doubt will go away even when the fighting has stopped. A VAT-funded UBI taxes everything, while giving the best result to the poor. In my view, we are Mother Earth's Gaia's favoured child. We sharing her seeds doesn't diminish, but honours her. It forwards life. The barren soils of Mars should be our wake-up call. It isn't the universe, God's or nature's responsibility, but ours to ensure Gaia's survival and our own. My advice to the political left is to include an income tax exemption, charge a higher VAT rate, pay the higher UBI amount, and a pension cost of living increase. This and a carbon tax and dividend offers the best result to the poor. A CGT will lower the UBI base, but it is needed in a just society. It also offers price protection in a more affluent world. A world capital gains tax would have us fairly tasking stock exchanges with the deduction of a 30% CGT. Simply print the first 2 months UBI, raise the VAT rate, and phase in the different levels of tax exemptions as afforded. My thanks to my good friend Ian McNee. He's the cartoonist and our cameraman today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Those were amazing slides. I wish all the slides could have such great cartoons. Next, we will invite Isobel Frye to discuss online how policy compromise shaped the study of the South African targeted social relief of distress grant. Isobel, can you hear us okay?
I can indeed. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Isobel. We are ready when you are.
Great. Thank you. And greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for agreeing to screen my slides. And it's a delight to be part of BN. There was a great BN conference in Cape Town. It must have been about 16 years ago, because my 17-year-old daughter, who was 3 months old, was at my knee there. So this is really a family affair, so to say. So look, the topic I interpreted and applied to really take politics and look at it from a policy perspective. I'm going to share with you an ongoing experience. So it's something which is unfolding in real time in South Africa, which is a post-COVID grant, which many of us thought would be the first step towards a universal basic income grant. And just the question is compromise in the policymaking sphere helpful or not when you take something and try and mold it and use the spaces available. So I'm just going to say slide, and if the presenter could then move, if the tech team could then move it on. In the interest of time, if you could move, please. So I'll start with, there we go, definitions. I always think it's important when talking about UBI to state up front what it is that you define. So in terms of looking at the bottom definition, within my organization, the Social Policy Initiative, which is a progressive feminist think tank on social security policy and UBI in Johannesburg, we have done a number of research papers that are available on our website there, www.spi.net.za. We define it as a permanent, unconditional monthly cash transfer paid to everybody from the state, indexed to the national upper bound poverty line as part of a macro level economic transformation and to meet the state's constitutional and international obligations. So one of the things that we've found is many people see a basic income as being a charitable response. In our framing of the argument in favor of the adoption of a universal basic income, given the very sluggish economic growth in South Africa, we've enabled people to see the economic impact of the scale of a universal cash transfer system. And so taken people out of seeing it as a poverty mopping up system and really as a form of economic as well as social and constitutional governance. Just briefly, when I refer to social security, I include both social assistance, which is cash-funded transfer, state-funded cash transfers, and social insurance, which is contributory. So just to affirm, for us, the universal basic income is unconditional. It's a decent level, which is linked to the upper bound poverty line, and it's unconditional pay to everybody. Slide. Thank you. So very briefly, the history of UBI in South Africa is we're almost 30 years into a post-apartheid democracy. South Africa has arguably the most progressive constitution in the world, guaranteeing the fundamental rights to life, dignity, and equality. We also have justiciable socioeconomic rights, which means that everybody in the country has the right to go to the courts, the constitutional court. If their rights are not met, there's the right to social security, which is inclusive of the right to social assistance. It is, however, subject to progressive realization within available state resources, which is the internal limitation. So despite these constitutional guarantees, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, both in terms of income and wealth. The previous presentation was interesting about the taxation system. Despite years of calls for a universal basic income grant from civil society and trade unions, there's been complete policy resistance to giving cash grants to working age people despite their poverty levels. And that was until the COVID-19 epidemic hit. In May 2020, a means-tested temporary categorical cash transfer was rolled out, and it continues to be paid today with various amendments to the policy itself. Many call this the first step towards a decent universal basic income. But the question that I ask and try to answer is, what are the costs of having ideal policies introduced by compromise, and is it a cost worth paying? Ultimately, that is where the role of policy activists come in. We argue situations change, policies will always need to be adapted, and activists will always need to be active. Slide. Briefly again, this is a very busy slide, but a population of 61 million people in South Africa. We have an unemployment rate of 42.4 million people. So that's basically 12 million people who are unemployed, 16.2 million people who are employed, including 3 million who are employed in the informal economy. We've got another 16.5 million people not economically active. If you look down at the bottom left-hand corner, amongst 15 to 24-year-olds, we've got a 71% unemployment rate. 25 to 34-year-olds, we've got 50% unemployment. Gender, more women are inactive economically than men. We have 77% long-term unemployment, and the apartheid racial privileging of white continues to determine people's livelihoods. 3.2 million of the unemployed haven't completed high school. Another 3.2 million, I know it looks coincidental, of the unemployed have completed high school but have no tertiary. Just under 1,800,000 of the unemployed are university graduates. So the reason I'm giving this slide is just to show that unlike many European countries, when we talk about people who are outside of the social security safety net, life is incredibly hostile and barren for people, because for adults until COVID, there was no, despite the constitutional guarantee, there was no social security benefit at all. And this is why the question of universal basic income appeared to be so attractive, and yet we seem to be stuck. So unemployment is due to a structural lack of demand more than a supply side driven. Slide. I've mentioned already that inequality, South Africa, as well as having the most progressive constitution in the world, has the highest inequality, both in terms of wealth inequality. The top 10% earn 71% of the wealth, the bottom 60% earn 7%, which is compared to 50 and 13% respectively for member countries of the OECD. The 2016 consumption Gini was 0.67. Income inequality is driven by wage inequality that is still determined by apartheid wages, where Black people were deliberately paid very low wages because they officially did not require civilized wages, as white people did. Pre-COVID, the most recent official poverty stats, that was 2015 survey, showed that 55% of people fell below the upper bound poverty line, which is the equivalent, the rough equivalent of $52 per month. 1 in 5 people fell below the food poverty line of $36 per person per month. Slide. Section 27(1)(c) says that everyone's entitled to social security, including if they're unable to support themselves and their dependents, appropriate social assistance, and the internal limitation of the state taking reasonable measures within its available resources to progressively realize the rights in the Bill of Rights. Slide. So just going to the history of social security policy, before 1994, under apartheid, South Africa was effectively a very effective welfare state for whites. There was minimal social assistance to other races. For working age white adults, there was effectively full employment because of job reservation. So for people who fell outside of the full employment, there were various social assistance programs to mop them up. 1994, democratic rule came to South Africa. Our constitution was adopted in 1996 with that right. And really what we have in South Africa in terms of social security is we have a voluntary private provisioning of retirement savings, categorical and targeted social assistance. Oh, sorry, I'm getting myself confused. That was under apartheid. So after 1994, we have an expanding social security system to include all race groups, but it is, again, very categorical and patchy. It's interesting to note how expansion occurs to the social security, and we've had very many constitutional court challenges, particularly around our child support grant that was first available to poor children under 9, and then there was a court case, and then under 11, and then a court case and expanded to 15, and then under 18. So I think it goes to show that the judicial system is very available to people, and it's very active. Civil society is very active in using it in order to expand access to social security. But 2004, we had a new Social Assistance Act that really maintained the same categories as the apartheid system, with no permanent assistance for able-bodied working age people. And as at 2023, of a population of 61 million people, 4.2 million people receive the means-tested state-funded old age grant. 1.1 million people living with disabilities receive a disability grant, and 13.9 million children receive monthly child support grant, and that's also means-tested. So for a developing country, we have a fair system of social assistance, but there's a huge missing middle and always has been, and that's around working age people. Slide. So the gaps are the value of the income grants is not linked to any needs constructed index. It's determined by how much Treasury decides it can afford. There is no inclusion for 18 to 59-year-olds. And the targeting means that the most vulnerable generally are not able to negotiate the eligibility requirements and proof, and so are left out of the social security net. There we've got a queue of people waiting to get their monthly cash payments from the state old age, the social security agency that pays out. Thank you. Slide. So there has been a constant refusal to see social security as an integral pillar of economic development and correction, a correction of the economy, that is. It is viewed rather as a charitable response to poverty, not the necessary policy pillar to restructuring a structurally failed economic and social nation with the need to change macroeconomic fundamentals to accommodate this. Slide. So the next couple of slides just are evidence of the fact that there has been a consistent call for universal basic income from a policy perspective. 2002 was a report of the ministerially appointed Committee of Inquiry into a Comprehensive Social Security System in South Africa, named the Taylor Committee after Professor Vivian Taylor, the chair. And this was a 3-year expert level process of research, and it recommended a complete overhaul of the social security system and the introduction of a universal tax-funded basic income grant. It was rejected by government. Second bullet point, third bullet point, an expensive, complex, and wholly inadequate scheme of workfare was introduced by the government rather than a universal basic income. Slide. Civil society groups established a UBI campaign in 2002. My research think tank has consistently called for a universal basic income, and we tabled it at NEDLAC, which is a social dialogue forum, from 2010. In 2010, we further established a SADC campaign, which is Southern Africa Development Corporation, for a UBI funded by a tax on regional extractives, mining companies, mostly by MNCs, as well as national interests. So there has been a very persistent and constant call, but it's something which the government has not conceded to in any way until now. Slide. And then in 2021, NEDLAC, the institute that I referred to earlier, we government released a green paper into comprehensive social security through the National Economic Development and Labour Council, which is a 4-way statutory socioeconomic policy social dialogue. We were lead negotiators for civil society, known as community constituency. As I said, we'd put the UBI on the table at the beginning of the negotiations in 2010. The Green Paper recommended the serious consideration of the same reform recommendations as the Taylor Report had done in 2002, the adoption of a universal tax-funded decent basic income, the establishment of a national social security fund, and the migration of private pension funds to the National Social Security Fund. And this is where politics comes in, because politics is determined by elite pacts. 1 week after the Green Paper was published, was withdrawn by government for further consultation, and it has disappeared. Business was resistant to the anticipated loss of management of fees from private pension funds, and so the whole paper was withdrawn without any due process being invoked. The question is how politics can be used to put this back in. Slide. Slide. Am I getting close to my time limit?
You have 20 seconds.
Right. Okay. So then in 2020, we had a national lockdown due to COVID. And one of the demands that we as community constituency in NEDLAC demanded was the introduction of a cash grant to working age people who were not in formal employment, because people in formal employment were receiving unemployment insurance, TERS. And that was the introduction of the 350 grant, which is about just under $19 US. It was introduced initially for 6 months. Since then, we have consistently threatened court action. It continues, but the problem with that is it is a very small amount. It is very categorical. Treasury keeps on shifting the eligibility requirements in order to reduce their overhead line item on the budget. And because it was an emergency-related introduction, we've not been able to argue that it needs to be permanently introduced. So the question that I asked at the beginning of the presentation, is it good to use compromise in order to leverage policy shifts of the magnitude of a universal decent basic income grant? There's an evidence in both ways. I think that we are a far greater, it is a victory to have achieved what we have. I think that the fact that it's been continuing year on year since 2020, we were able to show that there is budget space. The research that we do on a daily basis of how people use the grant to meet basic needs as well as to start economic activity argues for the fact that it's really necessary, and it's important to have ongoing monitoring and evaluation of that. But it comes down to political will. We've got an election next year. My institute and a number of other allies are meeting with all the opposition parties, as well as the leading party, that ANC, and trying to argue that this needs to, the call for a universal basic income grant needs to be a politically endorsed, non-partisan response to not only human rights and poverty alleviation, but also to the economic malaise and meltdown, which happens when most of your people are excluded from being economic actors. So we've made some progress, but we certainly don't have a universal basic income. But I think for what we have achieved in the last few years, we need to be applauded. And I hope that you will affirm in every space that you can the fact that South Africa needs a universal basic income in an urgent manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Okay, then Bruno, we have still not located where his whereabouts are, so then we will go to our next speaker, which is Peter Knight from Bien, and he will speak on how basic income disappeared from the Forward Party's core principles and how to get it back.
Okay. I'm wearing my Forward Party hat, not my Bien Party hat today, and my shirt, not left, not right, forward. Oh, okay. Okay. I click on the right. Doesn't work.
I think it's the
So the left one goes, okay, the left goes forward. So the first part, I'm just going to talk about Andrew Yang's support for UBI, which he enunciated before he ran for president and the primaries, the first primaries of the 2020 election in the Democratic Party, and then a little on the founding of the Forward Parties. And then we'll go on to a little bit about what's happened after the founding of the Forward Party. So he first enunciated this in 2018 in his book, The War on Normal People. My paper is available online, I believe, and the presentation, so there are links there. You can see the original links, so I won't repeat them. UBI had not been part of the political discussion of the United States in the, until the election, the primaries of the Democratic Party in 2019, 2020, and Yang's call for what he called a freedom dividend after a little work on focus groups on what would be a name that would resonate across the political spectrum. They came up with freedom dividend, $1,000 a month for all citizens. And it was the most important plank in his party, in his platform, but his platform had something like 60 planks. It was a very elaborate platform. And he was able to promote this because there were nationally televised debates for the primary candidates of the Democratic Party, in 6 of those debates, until he withdrew when it was evident from the votes in the New Hampshire primary that he wouldn't stand a chance, so he then supported Biden. So it was in October 2021 that he founded the Forward Party, FWD. And the focus was on reducing polarization by implementing electoral reforms. But there were 6 core principles, and one of these core principles was universal basic income, along with the political and electoral reforms and some thoughts about fact-based governance and human-centered capitalism and effective modern government, making use of modern technology and all of that, and the attitude of grace and tolerance for diverse opinions. These core principles can be found on the line, but you'll have to go to the Wayback Machine, the webarchive.org, to find them, because the Forward Party no longer has them in their principles. So what happened? There was a merger of two other movements, the Serve America movement and the Renew America movement. And that was on July 24 last year. This merger took place. And I have to say there were a lot of Republicans in those other groups. And in order to have the unity and to focus on the electoral reforms, they dropped the UBI, and instead, I'll show you the values and principles in the next slides. But after that, he did give a video address to the BN conference in Brisbane last year, in which he supported UBI. So I'm still a youngster, and I'm still fighting for UBI within the Forward Party. So core principles, free people, well, that's pretty generic. Thriving communities and vibrant democracy. Well, what principles, how do we propose to implement them by adhering to these values, which you can read? But you won't find any economic principles in here. You won't find a national policy program. Instead, the current rules, shall we say, are to build back, to build a national program starting from the bottom, from the state level. And they've chosen 12 states to concentrate on their battleground states, purple states, shall we say, with a substantial number of electoral votes, which are swing states in national elections. But the emphasis is on getting candidates that accept the principles into local level positions. And they say they're not running anybody for the presidency in 2024. This is the idea. The national sets principles and values. State parties set priorities. States use principles and values to weigh in on legislation. Candidates take positions on policies, and voters choose the policies. Well, I find this a little bit vacuous, but that's the current policy of the party. So I'm in the Pennsylvania Forward Party, which is one of those key battleground states, and I've already taken part in some Zoom meetings, and I'll be face-to-face meetings, but we'll see how we go from here. What can we do? This is a suggestion. Can learn from another. We know that there's over 100 basic income like pilot programs that are either have been already conducted or underway or about to be conducted in the United States. There's Marriage for Guaranteed Income. There's the income that supporting these. So we work with collaboration with policymakers and stakeholders, utilization of all this research that's being done on the pilots that's centralized to some extent in the University of Pennsylvania, and then grassroots movements and coalition building. It's a long-term proposition, but the income movement, for example, has a target of a national UBI by 2030. So I'm happy to take questions along with the others. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Let's go ahead and take questions from the audience. I want to invite the online folks to participate. There should be a hand raise feature on the Zoom if you would like to ask a question. Otherwise, I will turn it to the floor. Are there any questions? Yes, Eduardo.
Yes. Well, congratulations for the speakers. The break I came in the middle, so Eternite and the as well Isobel, right? Well, I would like to know. Eternite has lived in Brazil and he has followed some of the things that happened in our struggle for universal basic income. In Brazil, I was a senator, and in 2002 and 2003, I was able to present and have a basic income proposal approved, and that was sanctioned by President Lula on January 8th, 2004, 19 years ago. But the law says that the citizens' basic income will be established step by step under the executive criteria to take into account first those most in need. Well, and then we had a period of Michel Temer and Jair Bolsonaro that didn't give attention to that. But fortunately, President Lula won the election last October, and I believe that he might really put into practice the universal basic income. President Lula was this week in South Africa, and I believe that he has changed ideas there with the government of South Africa, and there might be good resolutions. Well, I came here to have more energy for my struggle for the basic income. And I would like to tell you that I hope that in those 3-4 months, in the next 4 years, we will have good news about the basic income that will contribute for the objectives that all of you, Peter Brake, Isobel Frye, and Peter Knight, and all of you have expressed here. So, and I think that it's very important to exchange views, ideas, and obstacles in order to overcome the obstacles. And once we have the basic income in the States, in South Africa, in all those countries, I think that there will be an acceleration of our objective to institute the universal basic income to all inhabitants on Earth. Thank you very much.
Would you like to give a comment? Or
Well, I just
Brazil.
think it's very important what's the working group that's being set up by President Lula, and that it is smart. You'll try to recruit people across some of the political spectrum. I suggested to Eduardo Suplicy that Andre Lara Asenji, who's a heterodox economist, who's one of the people behind the Real plan and previously the Cruzado plan that defeated inflation in Brazil, or hyperinflation, and is a modern monetary theory person, I think would be helpful to get that kind of broad support behind this committee that would be advising the government on implementation of a UBI.
And I think Isabel wanted to comment. Isabel? You're muted, Isabel.
Apologies. Anyway, I just wanted to recognize Senator Suplicy. He came out to South Africa for the World Summit on Sustainable Development and actually stayed in the house of the chair of my board, and was incredibly active and inspiring to everybody then. So thank you for that. I think, Senator, your point about the collaboration is really important. We've got the BRICS summit in South Africa with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the new members. One of the things I put to our Minister of Social Development is that we should try and get a political agreement to have a social security and UBI summit coming out of this current BRICS summit in 2024. So I think that those political leadership summits, as well as these kinds of interest gatherings, are really important to ensure a broad band of support. And of course, the research findings from different countries in terms of the impact and the evidence of cash transfers is really important. One of the things that I would love to hear people's reflection on is the huge debate around universalism and why that is not being more effectively won globally, despite the evidence that targeting is so detrimental to people's well-being. So that would be my one question to the floor. But thank you again to the Senator for historical and current contributions.
Thank you, Isabel. Well, maybe if Peter wants to comment on Eduardo or Isabel's question.
I would like to comment on Isabel's experience that we have in New Zealand. We have a very wide range of. Speak louder.
Louder, please.
Yeah,
Or into the
microphone.
microphone is also used. Come on, voice, come on, sorry.
Oh, yes. You can sit over here. We have a microphone.
Don't
Be careful there. You got it. Yeah.
We have quite a large number of people on unemployment benefits, and what happens in our country, it's definitely a poverty trap. You're looking at a situation where if you lose your unemployment benefit, if you work out what your effective pay rate is, you can work full time and get a few dollars an hour after you lose your benefits. So the universality of it removes the poverty trap. So that has to be the chief thing. But the repercussions of this, really, it's psychologically, you are making yourself qualify for these benefits. So you are dragging yourself down in a number of different ways, and you are making yourself unemployable. You first of all, you start doing it as a way of saying, "Oh, I'm just playing a game here. I'm just qualifying. I'm just doing this thing." But it becomes real. You are harming yourself to qualify for a benefit. And we have a lot of people that are harmed. The damage of this in a society is it has to change. Okay.
I know. Just on the BRICS issue, We know that Brazil is going to contribute and maybe South Africa. India, well, we defer to South Davala, but I do know that in China, that I learned from Philippe that he's been asked to go to China and speak in several places in China, and that the party school in Guangzhou or Shenzhen, one of these, bought 200 copies of his books, or one of the books on basic income. So maybe there's some hope that with the current difficulties in the economy of China, that there may be a new policy forthcoming from China. So we'll leave Russia to see whether somebody will shoot down Putin.
Wow.
We do have a few supporters in Russia.
I did hear that Russia they had a group, but I don't know what happened to the Russian UBI group. Are you familiar with them?
Well, Alexander Soloviev, who is in Hyderabad, is active in both Ukraine and his parents. He's born in Ukraine, lives in Moscow, but it's pretty quiet right now because of the war and things like that. But there is the seeds there, but I don't think there's any mass movement that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Something on that. So there was some stuff that Putin commented on a few years ago, which to me, the universal basic income there is an answer to a lot of the problems they have. So the informal nature of work there, a lot of people don't pay income taxes. They work under the table. It's about 50% of all work that happens there is unofficial work. There's no pension. There's no pension allocation. There's no pension contributions. So what they've got when they finally finish work is they've spent their money, and they have nothing. They have no pension to go on with. So the VAT funded UBI, because there's no income tax or very little income tax being made. So if they move to a VAT tax, it doesn't even matter that there's no income tax being generated. So the UBI replaces the pension that they no longer qualify for. I'm saying that you should have no income taxes for anybody under like $80,000, which they don't earn anyway. To me, it was the obvious answer for what was going on and is going on and the problems that they're having there in Russia.
Do we have any comments? Yes.
Well, thanks for your talk. I have a question to Peter.
Speak up.
I have a question to Peter. The forward part one. You just briefly mentioned modern monetary theory. As far as I understand, it's not really about taxing the rich. It's the other way around, that the state would spend first and then tax later, as in like a social contract, because it's about social contract between different economic agents, that you borrow money from myself and then you have to pay it back. That's a social contract. So taxation functions merely as a something like credit, right? So my question is, are there any discussions going on to fund UBI through the state's deficit spending?
Well, in the case of Andrew Yang, he proposed a VAT, which does not exist presently in the United States, and that was his proposal for funding. And the discussions are not at a popular level at this point. There is the big conference of basic income guarantee. A lot of the focus in present time seems to be on the pilots and learning from the pilots and disseminating the stories that come out of them and building toward a federal UBI. But it's not a popular debate on the tax issue. It's a more academic one, as far as I know. As far as modern monetary theory, I mean, I certainly am in favor of direct emission of part of the UBI be monetary creation, rather than letting the banks do the money creation to make it direct. But that's my own personal view as an economist.
Any other questions or comments? I think we have just about wrapped it up anyway, that we can move toward the plenary session. We'll have in the ECC, is that correct? Well, at 2:30. Okay, well, fantastic. Yes, one more comment before we leave.
There's
Yes.
next Tuesday in the National Congress of Brazil, there will be a great meeting about how to solve the inequality that in Brazil, like in South Africa, is very big. And with the presence of President Lula, the presence of the Minister of Social Development and others. And I'll be there. So, and we'll tell some of the reflections that we have here exchanged. So it might be a good opportunity.
Okay, well, let's thank our speakers one last time. Thank you, Isobel. All right, we can move toward the main session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for hosting. And yeah, look forward to further conversations, including at Bath next year.